Uh, so back at the start of quarantine, a year ago, I was one of the people who got in on the bread making kick. And I've been discussing the recipe with other people who got into sourdough and decided I finally refined it to a place where I'm happy with it. I'm going to share with you how I do sourdough. It's a little different than the other recipes out there, but I had to adjust it for what works best in my oven, my situation, my lifestyle, and maybe you can take inspiration for this for your own recipes. Hi Roxy, do you like bread? You can't have bread. It doesn't do anything for you. I'm assuming for this recipe you already have your starter. Now I've been culturing this for about a year. It's finally getting as bubbly as I like. I haven't fed it yet today, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to feed my starter and I'm going to use the discard to make the leaven, which will make our bread later. So it's going to be, this process takes about 2 days overall. A lot of it's just waiting. You're probably only going to have to spend like 20-25 minutes in the kitchen, but there are hours in between of just letting things rise, letting it relax. So we gave the dog a bell.
Now this was in the fridge, right?
This was in the fridge. So what I do, it's cultured enough where I only feed it once a week. So in the morning, take it out of the fridge, I put it on the counter. That's 3 to 4 hours right there. Just let it get up to room temperature. Let it wake up, because the cold kind of puts the yeast to sleep. So leave it on the counter, we'll let it wake up. Then when it's woken up, we'll feed it. And then once it's eaten for a while and it's nice and bubbly again, we'll put it back in the fridge for another week. But the way I have it now is I get a half cup of discard every week, typically right before the weekend, and I can use that to make bread or waffles or other things. If there's a recipe that requires yeast and wheat, you can probably make a sourdough variety, whether it's banana pancakes, whether it's waffles. Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of that. But today, we're just making straight sourdough bread at home. I'm not assuming anyone has fancy equipment. So if you have an oven and 2 bread pans, you're good. You can make this. So this is my starter. I put too much water in it last week, so it's a little bit more liquidy than I tend to like. But it's fine if there's bubbles in it, it's active. I'll just show you the proportions I use today. But yeah, this has been culturing for about a year. It typically takes a couple of weeks to get it bubbly enough to start making bread with. I'm not going to go over how to make a starter today. I'm just going to assume that you have your starter. I will say, if you have trouble making your starter, if you have other friends making a starter, try exchanging discard. Because maybe to the introduction, different areas of the world have different yeasts and they react differently. So if your area doesn't have a very active yeast, if you have a friend just 2 miles down the road, they have different yeast. There's always yeast in the air, and all we're doing is we're making a culture of it to make our bread. So this is all local central New York, Hudson Valley yeast. We almost did yeast exchange with someone in Rochester, but they forgot to send it. Welcome back! We're now ready to feed our starter and get our discard. But in the break, we realized that I don't think we've shown off our amazing merchandise. So if you really love us and you really love cooking the stuff that we cook, you can go pick up yourself a Team Manticore cooking apron. It has pockets.
Hey.
We have our sourdough starter. It is awake now. It's been out in room temperature. We have our whole wheat flour. It is important to use whole wheat. It's got more goodies that the yeast likes. We've got our half cup measuring cup, and we've got a bowl to put our discard in. So, first, we're going to just scoop out a half cup of the discard. Make space for what we're going to put in there. There we go. Doesn't that look appetizing? Alright. Now, rinse this off.
You either have to rinse it off quick, or at least soak it, because this stuff does become cement when it's left on whatever you're using.
Wheat and water is definitely a glue. So if you leave it alone, it'll just be super hard to clean. So we're going to take the half cup and we're going to replace the half cup we just took out with a half cup of the whole wheat flour. I like to use warm water. The reason I like to use warm water is it keeps the yeast, it makes the yeast more active than using cold water, which will put it back to sleep. That's why we took it out of the fridge. So, warm water, not hot water. It should still be comfortable to touch, but warmer than the air. I'm going to use not quite a half cup, because I don't like this getting too soupy. A little more than a third, but less than a half. Highly scientific measurements. Then I take a nice clean butter knife, and I just stir it together until all the dry flour disappears into that sort of consistency. You can also scrape the sides, incorporate those in. So yeah, about that level of consistency is what I go with. That allows you to see the bubbles as they're forming and get an idea of how active it is. Now, it's got enough air in there, so we can just recap this, and we're just going to set it aside. We're going to let that go for 2 to 3 hours and just let the yeast start making its meal. And then when it's nice and bubbly, we'll put it back in the fridge for a week. In the meantime, we're going to start our bread. And we're going to start our bread by making leaven. So we're going to take our half cup of discard. We're going to get another half cup of flour. We've got a half cup of whole wheat flour in here with the discard. And then we're going to use a full half cup of warm water, because this you want to be a little more goopy. So mix that in with the butter knife, using it to scrape the sides, and you just want to incorporate all the dry stuff until it's wet. Like a bowl of oatmeal sort of consistency. The knife should move it and leave a path behind it, but it should quickly just loop together. That is our leaven, and we're going to leave that covered by a dry cloth for the same amount of time that we're leaving that out, because we want this to get nice and bubbly too. So, have you tried cheese?
I love that one.
Where did we get this? Do we want to do a shout out?
From the Sourpuss website.
Sourpuss, great brand, good fun stuff. The devil wants you to try cheese. Live deliciously. So we're going to put a cloth over, and this will keep any critters out, any flying things, any dust that happens to be falling. You know, you never know. It's better to cover it. You don't want, and plus it'll keep the top from getting crusty from air exposure. So just tuck that, and that goes to the side. And now we relax for 2 to 3 hours. Go watch Netflix. Catch up on that show you like. So we're back hours later. And as you can see the consistency, you can see I don't know if you can see the bubbles that have formed. Mm-hmm. That's what you want to see. You want to see a good amount of bubblage all from each side. And that means you put it back in the fridge. Till next week. Forget about it. So now we have our leaven, which has been sitting for the same amount of time. And you can see the bubbles in there as well. It's got a good amount of bubbling.
Bubbles.
Some surface bubbles. So now we're going to make this into our dough, and we're going to let that sit overnight so it can get nice and fluffy. And then tomorrow we'll do the final steps and actually pop it in the oven. So we got 10 more minutes in the kitchen tonight working this into the dough, and we just leave it alone. So got the bowl, mixing bowl for it. I'm going to start with warm water and the leaven to break it up and distribute it, and then I add the flour. So it's 2 1/4 cups of warm water. Warm but not hot. It shouldn't be uncomfortable to touch, but it should be warmer than room temperature. I like using a spatula for this step. Just make sure everything mixes all right and doesn't get your hands too sticky. We'll work plenty with our hands in the dough tomorrow, but today keep our hands clean. And we just spatula in the leaven. And then we just mix it until it's consistent, bubbly. I feel like the shadows in here are a little harsh. Can you see?
Yeah.
Alright. So that's all set. So now we're going to mix in our 5 cups of all-purpose flour. You can also use bread flour. Do not use whole wheat flour. The bread will be the wrong consistency. But bread flour or all-purpose flour. I used to keep bread flour around 2, but all-purpose I actually think gives you a better consistency, and it prevents me from having 3 types of flour in the kitchen. So I'm going to start by putting in 2 and mixing that together, and then I add the cups one at a time so that we can watch the dough come together in a consistency, instead of dumping all 5 in and just having to fight with all that powder, trying to incorporate it into the leaven plus the water, because we don't want clumps of dry flour hanging out in there. And it's going to be a little clumpy, so let's put in cup number 3. We work that in. Out from the edge and up with the spatula to flip and incorporate. And you can see it sort of folding. And you can see it sort of coming together and becoming one singular mass. It also already starts to smell like bread at this point, because you've got the yeast in there, you've got the warm water, and you've got the flour, so it just smells like bread. Bland bread, but bread. Oh, I got my fingers sticky. Like I said, I didn't want to. Let's put the spatula on the side, and it's time for cup 4. Now we did set this up for daytime lighting, so the entire kitchen was set up to shoot in the daytime, but obviously with the time we have to wait, it's no longer daytime, which is why the lighting has changed. And that's how you know we're not cheating. We're doing it live.
Hi, Roxy.
If I think it's too shaggy, I might add a smidge more water, because I do like it to be a little bit not overly moist, because it's gonna overnight. It's gonna soak through, and all the not wet's gonna get more wet as the water goes through. But I don't like it being super shaggy at this point. We'll add more water tomorrow, but yeah, one more cup has to go in there. 5 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 1/4 cups of water. You mix that into your 50-50 leaven. That has been sitting room temperature for about 4 hours at this point. Like right on the edge of flakiness is where we're at. A little shaggy, I think it's called.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm really excellent at this by the terminology that I barely know. But the results are that we've essentially made mostly our own bread for the last year.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you do different flavors.
We have experimented with different flavors, and those are getting better too. The first night, it's got a little bit of pull. It's still a little sticky to handle, but there's definitely a shagginess to it. So, all we do now is we cover it back up with our cloth, and we set it aside until tomorrow morning. This is the time in the bread where the gluten is forming. The yeast is active. It's got a lot of wheat to eat, and it's going to form those glutinous bonds. And then tomorrow we're going to layer those, let it rest so that everything settles, and then we'll shape it into the pans and put it in the oven. So this is about the halfway point. Most of it is waiting. Even tomorrow, we're only going to spend like 10 minutes actually in the kitchen. The rest of it is just waiting for the bread to do what bread does. It's just about having patience that it's doing what it's supposed to do while you aren't there. Alright, so it's the next morning. We've let our dough rest overnight at room temperature with a cloth covering it. Let's see how it looks. Oh, that's fluffy as shit. Look at that. That's a good looking amount of fluff. That is more than twice of what was in this bowl before.
Yeah.
So we did good. So now we're going to add the rest of the water along with the salt. You don't add the salt till this point because the salt inhibits that fluffiness. So that's why we let this go so long with only wheaten water in it, because once you add the salt, it starts getting less fluffy. So we're going to add the salt, and then we're going to layer it to have those layers of gluten so it's even more fluffy, and then we're going to let it rest again. 1 teaspoon of salt. You know what, I just want to be on the metric system. It makes sense. It's factors of 10. I don't... What? What's up, America? Why?
Actually, where you did. Actually.
There.
Where are you trying to go?
So then we're going to get a 1/4 cup of warm water. We're still using warm water because we don't want to inhibit too much, and plus it'll make the dough looser. And then while you're there, wet your hands. So we're making a wet dough, so you want to wet your hands, and that way it'll stick less. If you're making a dry dough, you'd want to put flour on your hands to prevent it from sticking. But we're going on the wet side of things, so wet your hands to prevent sticking, because we're going to put our hands in this bowl in like 2 minutes. Warm water, and now I gotta get wet. All right, hands are wet. Sides of the bowl. I'm going to just lift, flop. We're going to do this a bunch of times until the salt water is incorporated. What this does is this layers the gluten that was forming last night, and it'll make the bread stronger, which allows it to fluff taller without the bonds breaking down. Roxy, you're not being neglected. I played with you. I took you for a walk. I fed you treats. I played tug-of-war. You're acting like you've never had attention in your life. The entire morning was about you until now.
Oh, Roxy.
The whole morning.
Hi.
We snuggled. You got tummy rubs.
You look so sad. Why do you look so sad?
She hates when I'm in the kitchen.
She does.
A lot of instructions say to do this every half hour over a 4-hour period. I actually find I get better results doing it all at once right now. And now, I'm starting to stick. And now we just cover it with the cloth and we let it rest for another 4 hours. It's going to fluff back up, but now we got those layers of gluten, and when we get back, we'll shape the dough, put it in the trays, and start the baking. We're making bread today, and we realized we're making breakfast with the bread I made last week with some mix-ins. We just incorporated the salt and folded the dough, and that is also the point where I would mix in the garlic. I don't know if you could see. This is the final form from last week. You can see it's nice and fluffy on the inside. It's nice and hard on the outside. It's got those classic bread cracks. It also smells extremely of garlic. I think this has 3 cloves in it, finely chopped, and some olive oil. I made you something in the kitchen. You want an apple? Good girl. Off to her eating corner.
Yeah, see, she's fine.
We treat our dog very well.
Are you spoiled?
She's little. She's pampered. Aw, puppy. So that, when you incorporate the salt, is when you incorporate any other mix-ins. If you want to do like garlic bread or onion bread or, you know, I don't know, pumpernickel, whatever you like. This is the slice.
Slice.
I'm going to make breakfast, so there's going to be an egg and some avocado on this with cheese. You're not that sad.
Roxy! Hey, how you doing? You okay?
You want to cry, I'll take you back to Pennsylvania. You can live in a barn and have something to cry about.
No, she just wants attention.
She's lovely.
Hey. 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 Yeah.
The most pampered of pooches. She gets to lay on
You're
the couch.
okay.
She gets piles of toys. She gets belly rubs every day.
She gets her own blanket. Yeah, now she's okay. No.
So our bread is folded and it's now rested. So let's see how that, oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. We can do a comparison shot between how it went in and how it is now, because it's once again like the size has almost doubled again. Preheating the oven to 500 degrees, and while that's warming up, we're going to take this dough and we're going to split it into our 2 bread pans. And in the meantime, we're going to get this all set to go in the oven. So, first thing we're going to do, we've got our olive oil cooking spray. I'm just going to spray the inside of our bread pans. Not heavily, but I want to make sure every surface that touches bread has it. You could have your own cooking spray. We just like the olive oil one for our house. There's less other stuff in it. It's basically just olive oil under pressure. Before, I had you wet your hands before doing the flip. But now we're working with a drier dough. So we're going to instead be flouring our hands. We'll be flouring our work surface. We'll be flouring our hands. And I am lucky enough to have a dough scraper. If you don't, then you can use a flat knife, something without the serrations, something smooth, and you just dip that in the flour as well, and that'll keep it from sticking. Let's get my hands and the surface all covered, and we're going to split this dough. Just tilt the bowl and go from the top, scoop down, so it remains one solid mass. You don't want to move it more than necessary at this point, because there's lots of air bubbles in there, and you want to keep those as much as you can. So using your floured cutting mechanism, you're just going to cut it as close to in half as you can. Want to separate them because otherwise it'll stick back together. And then we're just going to, using the flour and the edge of the blade, we're just going to try and curl these up.
Just loaf them.
Get them loafy. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you can tuck that in. That'd be good. Get under the edges. And we're just gonna plop that in there. Look at that. Yeah, we don't be rough with it because you want to keep the air bubbles, but I do want it to stretch out to the edges of the pan. So I'm just going to work on that. Good with some flour on the top. Now, one thing I learned that I didn't know before quarantine was that flour is super explosive.
Explosive?
Because it's a flammable powder and it has small enough particles. If it mixes enough into the air with enough density, this is why flour mills used to set on fire all the time.
Oh.
It's because having flour particles in the air makes it actually explosive.
Oh.
Because it's distributed throughout the air and a spark will just...
Danger.
Yeah. I am going to... Which one of these knives do I want to use? This one. So, what you want to do is you want to cut into the top a little bit so when the dough rises, it has that split. So it just rises up with the split instead of just popping everywhere. It'll keep you from having like fissures that mold spores can get in. It'll help your dough stay fresher longer.
Mm-hmm.
And you want it to be deep enough to actually be the fissure. So I like cutting into a little shaft of wheat. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be perfect. You want a seam for the dough to rise. So when it rises, this will split open, but it'll still be baked, so it'll still not be the inside, it'll be the outside. Do the same over here. If you're good at this, you can get really artsy, but I'm just keeping it simple. Like I said, we're not using anything that you probably don't have at home. The most fancy piece of equipment I have is my dough scraper and my tins. A lot of sourdough recipes calls for a Dutch oven. I don't have a Dutch oven, but I can imitate that baking mechanism by the first part of the cooking process We're going to cover these with tin foil. That'll keep the moisture inside, so as the steam comes off of the bread, the steam will be trapped and be directed back onto the bread, cooking it on top. It's a good way to imitate that sourdough texture that you get on the crust, where it's moist but also hard. Cooking, again, you're not spending a lot of time in the kitchen. This was like 5 minutes. A little lighter. I don't want to let all the heat out, but I don't want to touch anything either. So you're going to bake it at 500 for 20 minutes. Then we're going to turn it down to 450 and keep baking it for 10 minutes. Do not open the oven yet. She knows she's not supposed to.
No, but she likes being around you.
She does. She loves me so much. I just get love from both directions because I get the pure joy of your love, and I get the pure joy of her love.
She has serotonin.
Yes. Look at her. Look at how beautiful she is. She doesn't like going places where she has to back out. That's the thing.
Yeah.
After the 10 minutes at 450, we're going to reach in, we're going to take the tin foil off, and we're going to continue baking at 450 for at least half an hour, possibly up to 50 minutes. What we're going to do is at that point, after the 30-minute mark, we're going to be tapping the top of the bread, and it should come back as a hollow sound. Tin foil's coming off.
Be very careful.
Be very careful. Yeah.
You're right there?
Yeah. I'm just trying to get the tin foil, do a few tugs, out.
Ta-da!
Just set this out in case we're done. Because we're going to check. I've got my handy dandy bread knife. We're going to take the non-blade side, pop this open, and we'll just do that. I think that needs another 5 minutes. It's starting to sound hollow, but it's not quite there. So let's do another 5 minutes and come back. Once again, handy dandy bread knife. Give it a tap. Ooh, that one's done. I think they're done. Alright, just gotta grab. They're gonna be hot. They've been in a 450-degree oven. So, yeah, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these are still gonna bake for a while, but I want them to cool. So put on the rack there. Get this one out. Look at that. Super hot, and we're going to leave these on the rack because the inside's still baking. But you can see the patterns I did their intended purpose. There's a little bit of cracking in the middle there, but it mostly stayed along that line. You can see they did fluff up a bit from where they sat in the pan. Nice. Better. This one's got a little striation there. I don't like that. So we're going to leave these on the rack for about 10 minutes to cool. Again, they're still baking on the inside. So once that's done, we'll do a cross section and we'll show you how they turned out. So let's take a loaf. Still warm, not hot. Let's see how it looks on the inside. You can hear the crustiness, but it's also super soft on the inside. Look at that.
Nice.
Look at that.
Ooh.
Nice and spongy, but with a nice crust. Let's eat some bread. All right. Taste test.
Successful bread.
It's got a little bit of that sourdough tanginess to it, but it's not overwhelming. You got a good amount of moisture, a good amount of fluff. Good bread. So, again, made some alterations to this recipe based on other sourdough. So if you've been having trouble with your sourdough at home, give this a try. Leave in the comments if this helped you, or if you have a different recipe, or suggestions.
Or questions.
Or questions.
Maybe we can answer something.
Yeah.
And enjoy.
Enjoy. I think there's a bakery in France that's had their yeast culture for about a century now. I'll have to look that. I might be lying. Can we put a link right here to if I'm lying or not?
In post, I'll say if you're a liar.
Can I keep giving you stuff to do in post?
I mean, you can try.
I
As your wife, I reserve the right to just ignore you.
mean, as business partner, you can also ignore me.
That's true.
You've got veto power. So.
That's true.
Let's have a little duckling walk across the screen.
No.
And cut to break.